Happy Monday to all my cybernetic relations. I am Carla Viviana Gonzalez, a member of the Teachers Collective for Racial Justice, and I am bringing you this week's dose of unlearning. Today's lesson is centered around the evolution of policing in the United States, and we're focusing specifically on the increased aggression and militarization of our police forces. So when you look at the approach that police have in communities, it's important to understand what disposition these officers have going into these communities. Often there is this belief that certain communities, typically communities of color and typically impoverished communities, are inherently more full of crime, more susceptible to violence, that these people are more inherently criminal. So you have communities that are criminalized and a disposition that already leads you to believe that you are going to have the disposition of, not seeing someone as just an everyday community member, but instead a threat to your safety and a threat to the safety of others. Police advocates often say in defense of this argument that people and residents in high crime areas often ask for police presence and ask for officer patrolling, and that is true. However, these same residents and community members also ask for more funding for schools, improvements in youth programs, better access to healthy foods, to libraries, to public services. And still, in all of those asks, what receives the bulk of the allocation of resources and of funding is solely the policing and the criminalization of these communities. And so you start to see an incredibly aggressive approach against these people and against these residents, and you slowly start to see through certain programs as well the militarization of the police. Much of the militarized weaponry in possession of current U.S. police forces come directly from the Pentagon. And this is thanks to a 1997 weapons transfer program. It is said that through that program, $4 billion of weaponry was distributed throughout police force areas. You now have small community police forces that are armed with grenade launchers and tanks and riot gear, some with more lethal weaponry like rubber bullets, which are now very famously and notoriously being used against protesters in Seattle, in New York, in LA, and in Portland, which is in chaos right now. So you start to see through this aggression and through this militarization just a complete distortment of what the theory of a peacekeeper should be, right? But because we understand that law and order and crime and punishment doesn't mean peace, you start to understand that there are alternatives to this, that there needs to be a reorientation, and this time is calling for that. Often when it comes to the ways that officers are trained, there were two very famous memoirs written by officers that talked about the training that they received and the culture of the academies, the culture of the workplace. And both of these officers in these memoirs wrote that so often the trainings were around scenarios in which an everyday interaction, a daily interaction that should be normal and routine, turned into something that threatened their livelihood, that threatened their lives, that threatened their lives, something that could become fatal. And so you have officers who are repeatedly going through these exercises and starting to realize that if they're not prepared to use a lethal force in every interaction that they engage in, that their lives could be lost in certain communities. And that in of itself is a really fatalistic, really distorted way to see these communities. We know that ultimately, we understand that ultimately high crime rates aren't because of inherent criminality of Black and brown communities, but are instead because of inaccess, because of need, because of want that isn't being addressed by our communities. So we have to wonder what would happen if we collectively reoriented and reprioritized these strategies that we have to supporting our communities and really reassess how we want to protect ourselves, how we want to keep ourselves safe. And it's something I encourage us all to do. The militarization of the police is no joke, and is something that needs to be addressed and needs to be highly examined. Much work needs to be done, and much reflection needs to be done. I hope that you enjoyed this week's dose of unlearning, and I hope that I earned the privilege of your time.